Shalom. We are just finishing up the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And the book of Exodus begins, of course, with the Exodus, with our exit from Egypt, Yetziat Mitzrayim, which we will, of course, celebrate in just a couple months' time with Pesach. That's your fair warning to make sure that you're already thinking about the Chag and sign up at least for our second day Seder. And hopefully, if you have any questions about first day, you'll let me know. But the second half of the book of Exodus is not as dramatic. Nobody made a movie out of that. It involves the building of the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle, the gathering of all the supplies, the giving of the instructions, the actual construction, which we read about, especially in this week of Pekudei. It doesn't seem very exciting, but let's set aside the technicalities of the text and go to the big picture. Why are we building a Mishkan in the first place? And don't just say God told us to. That's the easy answer. Why would God have said, you need to build this tent tabernacle with all of its various utensils and with the Kohanim officiating? Any ideas why God would want us to build this thing in the first place? After all, between Egypt and there, we didn't have it. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their families didn't have it. So it's not as though this was something that was obvious from the beginning of the world. This was a decision, a choice. This was a mitzvah that had a moment. What purpose could it have possibly have served?
A focus point.
A focus point. So, first and foremost, this provided a focus point. Now, focus points can do many different things, depending upon who we are thinking of as focusing towards it. That is to say, there can be an individual focus point. Each and every one of the Israelites will now have a Mishkan to focus on, and this was a radical change. If you flip back a few pages or roll back a few feet, you'll find that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they built an altar wherever they felt like it. They offered up sacrifices however they felt like it, and they did so on their own. And that was still going on at the time that the Mishkan was being constructed. But once constructed, more or less, it gets a little complicated, but more or less, the Mishkan became that focal point for the individual prayer and the individual worship of Adonai in the formal capacity. Of course, a person could still pray whenever they felt like, wherever they might happen to be, but as far as the sacrificial service would go, it was there or nowhere. Again, with a few footnotes we can talk about later if you're interested. This changes the nature of our relationship because no longer are we just spontaneously stacking rocks on the middle of the top of any hill we happen to fancy. We are now constrained. We are now limited. We are now focused in a way that we couldn't be before. But there is also that second element of we are now focused in a way that we were not before. Because now it is not simply one member of some family over here or in a different family over there. Now we, as a nation, are focused together in a shared place. We are unified in our worship and celebration. We are seeing each other gather collectively, not merely as disparate individuals coming with our own agendas, but as members of a nation, of a community, of a people bound together through this focal point. So it is not only the focal point of each spirit, it is also the focal point of the nation. Two incredibly important purposes that the Mishkan is serving, and which at that point in our history, we desperately needed. Remember, although we had been focused in the pressure cooker of Egypt together as Israelites, as the slaves, now we were no longer within the confines of their whips and chains. And we needed a positive focus to hold us together, lest we fly apart in different directions. We're still going to try to do that. Stay tuned for the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, where we dance with our chaos and anarchy. But with the Mishkan, we certainly had a better chance of surviving that. Any other benefits that this Mishkan brings us?
A place to store the tablets and the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant, the tablets of the Ten Commandments, of the Brit, the Covenant of God goes into the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kodashim, and this then becomes a reminder of our relationship with Adonai. Indeed, one of the difficulties the early Israelites had when they were leaving Egypt is that they missed the stuff. Remember, Egyptians were a very materialistic culture. They built pyramids, for crying out loud, as a symbol of their religion, their faith, their worship, and their belief in the deification of their own god, King Pharaohs. And whether we accepted that or not, we were certainly infected by certain cultural trappings of Egyptian life. And needing a place that would allow us to still feel a somewhat tangible connection to Adonai was essential. Else we might be gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai forever for fear of leaving that place. This way, when we traveled, we would be taking the best of Sinai, the record of the covenant, along with us, and we would then feel that we could have that connection to God wherever we happen to be. Although God kept it rather modest, to say the least, compared to the Egyptian pyramids. But then lugging a pyramid across the desert was not really an option. And that brings me to the third and often less well discussed element of the Mishkan, and yet it is the only one that is explicitly stated within the Torah itself. I know it's surprising, but sometimes God actually does tell us why God does things. We often just didn't pay attention to it because it didn't come at a very exciting moment. After the fiasco of the golden calf, God says very plainly that he is going to back off, that he is not going to be as palpably present within the nation as they go forward, because if they've already messed up in the scale of sin like the golden calf, then they will probably mess up again, and God came this close to wiping out the nation at that point. If God's there, then their transgressions will hit the tripwire, and that will be it. There is a notion within Judaism that the presence of God, the sanctity of God's presence, creates both beautiful potential for spiritual connection, but also a great deal of potential for spiritual devastation. It is sort of like handling a high voltage cable. You can use it to power an entire city, or you can use it to fry yourself if you don't handle it carefully. It is a very powerful, but also potentially fatal interaction. And God says, these people are too reckless. I am going to cut the cable and see you later and take a back seat. Moses, is not having that though. Moses says, God, if you will not go with us, then what's the point? If you do not make yourself felt. I mean, yes, we know you're the creator of the universe and you're present in all places and all times, of course, but we need something that will remind us of your physical attachment to us, not just the metaphysical, not just the theological, not just the ethereal, the ephemeral. We need something that will remind us that indeed you are here with us, traveling this journey together with us. And so God compromises. God says, well, I can't actually go in a more powerfully present way like I was at Mount Sinai, because doing that is a recipe for disaster. That's the high voltage wire. But what I can do is, if you build the Mishkan, you can have a 120 volt wire coming in. Rather than the city main line of electricity, rather than the third rail of the subway line, you can have household power. And that will be represented through the Mishkan. It will be guarded, that is to say there will be a fence and a courtyard and then an inner sanctum and then an inner sanctum, and there will be a great many precautions around it in order to teach both respect and discipline, as well as to give yourself still a place where you can feel that spark of the divine without electrocuting yourself horrifically. And indeed, this is God's explanation for why the Mishkan. It is God's compromise to the people. God may not be able to travel with us as though it were Mount Sinai in every place in the world. Nothing special about Mount Sinai. God can manifest in that way anywhere, but to do so would render the people at risk. But to not have any manifestation of God's presence would create a feeling of despair among the nation. And so the Mishkan was there as a balance, to see a way to draw close to God, but to also allow for the fallibility of humans, to allow for the fact that while we would aspire to be a nation of priests, in the words of the book of Leviticus, that we were not yet angels, and thus we needed that balance. The Torah is an eminently human document, not because it was written by humans per se, but because it recognizes the humanness of the Israelites. It recognizes that it is not asking us to walk among the angels in the heaven, but it is asking us to walk in this world. And as such, it constantly strives to find a path that humans can walk, perhaps a little bit more challenging than we would pick for ourselves, thank God, because it allows us to rise higher than we otherwise would, but also not asking more of us or exposing us to potential dangers that we are not capable of handling. So find your path, look for the Mishkan. We have it now reflected in so many other physical aspects of Jewish life, and you will find that there is that palpable sense of Adonai in just the right measure. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.